Hello, and thank you for joining me again for this paper 2 revision video. Today we're going to be walking through the key case studies on this exam. Now, paper 2 is the case study exam, and for my class, that is going to be looking at Rio de Janeiro and Liverpool for the urban cities. It's going to be looking at Nigeria for the changing economic world, and finally the Lesotho and Wakel River Basin projects for water challenges and insecurity. We're going to begin with section A. Now, section A on this exam is worth 33 marks. It will include a 6 and a 9-mark question, and it is all about the process of urbanization, the fact that our cities are starting to grow and grow and grow. Now, there's a cartoon on here where there's some people waiting for the city to come to us, and that is a joke about urban sprawl. Around the world, cities are still growing massively, and that urban change creates a series of problems. Now, you guys need to know what the kind of outcomes of urban change are for a city in an LIC/NEE, in this case, Rio de Janeiro, and a city in a HIC, in our case, Liverpool. So, to begin, the first things you need to know about Rio are the causes of its growth. Now, Rio's two causes, and this is on my other tricky topics video as well, are mainly due to rural-urban migration, as hundreds of thousands of people have started to move to Rio because of the pull factors that it offers, like the job opportunities, the education, etc. as well. But the other main cause of growth is natural increase. Now, natural increase is the idea that there are more births than deaths, and as the death rate continues to fall and the birth rate continues to rise, the population is naturally growing at the same time. So Rio, on the east coast of Brazil, is the largest city in Brazil, but it is not the capital city. On a national level, Rio is the main hub for banking and finance in Brazil. Okay? So on a national level, Rio is extremely important, but it is also a major international city. 5 ports, 3 airports. It also hosted the 2014 FIFA World Cup and the 2016 Olympic Games. So for sport and by subsequent tourism, Rio is an incredibly important city. Now, the key to this exam is understanding that urban change in Rio has had significant impacts on squatter settlements, quality of life, and the environment. Now, in Rio, those squatter settlements we call the favelas. A favela is an unregulated part of the city. As Rio urbanized quickly, these favelas started to pop up because the government of Brazil could not keep up with demand for housing, for services, for education, etc. And so these favelas began to pop up. Now, unregulated means that for most of these favelas, the government does not provide services for them. And at the same time, the favelas often provide very little back to the government in form of tax, etc. as well. Now, on the one hand, that kind of unregulated aspect is really, really positive. It's great for culture, it's great for kind of artwork and music and freedoms, but at the same time, it has led to some significant challenges in Rio. Now, I'm going to go through these. First off with social, looking at healthcare, education and energy. And I'm going to do a kind of mix of the challenges and the opportunities. Now, throughout this video, I would strongly recommend you are making notes here. You want to know some specific facts. So if you're going for a grade 4, just knowing what the challenges are is fine. But if you're looking for a grade 7 or above, you're going to want to bring in some very specific facts about Rio, which this video has a lot of. So to begin with, I would describe healthcare as patchy. In Cidade de Deus, in the west of Rio, only 55% of the city had local healthcare for local pregnant women. And life expectancy was only 45 years old, and only 60% of pregnant women gained medical care. So in that particular part of Rio, the health issues were massive. However, in different favelas, things are slightly different. In Santa Marta, medical staff take medical kits to people's homes and are able to detect 20 diseases and treat them. Infant mortality rate has fallen, life expectancy has increased. In Barra de Tijuja, in the south, has been pacified, and pacification is all to do with the idea of the police going in and removing some of the criminal drug gangs in particular from those areas. So if we compare the two favelas there, in one favela in Rio, we've got a life expectancy of 45, and in another, we've got a life expectancy of 80. So what does that mean? Well, it means that overall, health care challenges are present for some, but not all. It all depends on which area of the city you live in and how much investment has been made in that area. The difference in life expectancy shows the huge health inequality that the city is still facing even today. Now, education is going to be very, very similar to healthcare. It is compulsory for 6 to 14-year-olds in Rio to attend school, but only 50% of children continue education after 14. So that's the equivalent of maybe getting into year 9, and that's when you finish your schooling opportunities. The level of school enrollments are low, as there are a lack of nearby schools. There's a shortage of teachers, poor training for teachers, drug trafficking and gangs. And it's not just about them having no schools, it's about them being able to staff those accordingly, people with the qualifications to actually teach. When you consider that only 50% of children continue education after 14, never mind then going to become teachers and actually work in these schools. But the Schools for Tomorrow program is using education to teach practical skills, and they've also opened a private university in the Roxina favela. Roxina is the largest favela in Brazil, and they have actually opened a university there now to encourage that education. I would say, overall, despite improvement, education remains a significant challenge in Rio. The Schools for Tomorrow program has helped, but it is not accessed by all residents across the city. And finally, we'll look at some energy challenges. Now, in Rio, there are frequent blackouts, which can affect hospitals, industries, and residents. And many people in the poorer parts of Rio illegally tap the main supply. Now, that means they do not have 24/7 access to reliable electricity. They have to tap into it themselves if they want to get that energy. Now, that is also a challenge because that also means that they're not paying money to energy companies who, by proxy, are not going to invest back in the area. So when I pay my Virgin Media Wi-Fi bill, of some of that money that I pay, Virgin Media then spend on improving the broadband links in Liverpool. In Rio, where these poor areas are, that's not happening, and it's having a kind of negative multiplier effect from that. But they have built over 60 kilometres of new power lines across Rio, and they are being improved by a new hydroelectric complex, the Simplico hydroelectric complex, in addition to that. And again, if we look at some evaluation here, the idea is that more stable energy will encourage economic development for Rio. So on to economic. Now, crime, interestingly enough, I think really would fall into social as well, socio-economic. So the main economic challenge here would be employment. Now, although unemployment is still extremely high, up to 20% in some favelas, the major issue here is that a third of the workforce are working in the informal economy or the informal sector. Now, these are jobs that are often quite poorly paid. They're unregulated, which means that if I'm a street vendor, or if you watch the documentary with Rocky who was carrying the fridge up the favelas, unfortunately, they don't pay tax. So this limits the multiplier effects that are going to take place from it, that we would normally see from economic challenges, opportunities rather. And there is very little investment in services by the government. Ultimately, if people aren't paying tax because they're in the informal economy, the Brazilian or the Rio government are going to have less money to then spend on healthcare, education, etc. in the favelas. However, again, what are they trying to do? Well, the Schools for Tomorrow program, part of it, is trying to encourage them to seek formal employment. There were thousands of jobs created from the Olympic Games in the building of the stadiums and construction, and that drives a multiplier effect. We've got the Terranium Steelworks, an expanding quaternary industry, and we've also got some free childcare to allow teenage parents to return to education. And what does this mean? Well, ultimately for Rio, their end goal has got to be the vast majority of people working in the formal economy. If they're in the formal economy, they can then achieve that positive multiplier effect. And similarly with this, we've also got crime as well. We know in the favelas that there is a lot of violent and criminal drug gangs, in particular a gang called the Red Command, which impacts the quality of education of children and thus their potential to enter that formal economy in the workplace. However, pacifying police units, PPPs, have gone into the favelas and pacified them, but it depends on which favela you are in. Not every favela has been pacified, although many have, which gives us to our conclusion again, there are opportunities for some, but not for all. And then finally, we have some environmental challenges in Rio. Now, before we kick off this slide, I want to give you a bit of background on Rio's physical geography. Now, being a coastal city, it does have a huge amount of water and bay areas, which increases the potential for water pollution. But also, if you consider the mountains around Rio as well, because it's so mountainous, a lot of the air pollution actually gets trapped inside the city and can't get out basically. So it's not just humans that are causing this problem for the environmental challenges, it are also the issues of Rio's geography itself as well. So, what are the challenges they're facing? Well, Garabamba Bay is heavily polluted. We've got huge threats to wildlife. Over 200 tons of raw sewage pours into that bay on a yearly basis, and the many rivers that flow into the bay are polluted by the runoff from the favelas. Ultimately, the sewage systems in Rio still to this day are not quite good enough, and so a lot of that sewage ends up in the water supply, which consequently pollutes the bay as well. But they have actually spent a lot of money on 12 new sewage works, and 5 kilometres of new sewage pipes have already been installed around the badly polluted areas. And a bit of evaluation for you here. The bay was actually so polluted the Olympic sailing couldn't take place. It was a massive embarrassment for Rio de Janeiro. And while they have improved to some extent, it is quite clear that these issues remain. We've also got air pollution. Rio is the most congested city in South America. The traffic delays have huge economic impacts, and 5,000 people die every single year in Rio due to the air pollution. Now, that's obviously with the increase in lung cancers, with the increase in breathing issues like asthma, bronchitis, etc. as well. But Rio, the most congested city in South America, if you add in the fact that it's got these kind of really steep-sided valleys that trap a lot of the airflow in, Rio has a real problem. But Rio has not necessarily invested massively in public transport. We're going to come on to the Favela Bairro project after this slide and look at the cable car they introduced as maybe a counteract to this. But unfortunately, air pollution is still a huge, huge challenge for Rio. And I wouldn't necessarily say there's a solution in sight. The public transport argument is difficult. It would require huge investment. It would require huge regulation that for most of the favelas currently doesn't exist. So actually doing it would be a huge hurdle to overcome for Rio. And finally is the waste. Many favelas are built on steep slopes, which make it really difficult to access for waste collection. If you can imagine trying to get like a lorry up the side of a favela, it was not going to happen, is it really? Most waste can be dumped, which could cause diseases, and only about 2% are formally recycled as well. But new power plants burning rubbish, landfill gas collected, and recycling as well is starting to occur. But unfortunately, I would say that actually the environmental challenges in Rio are not showing a huge amount of improvement in the long term. I still do believe that there are more challenges than opportunities for this example. And then finally, In the exam, there could be a 6 or 9 mark question about how urban planning can be used to improve the quality of life for the urban poor in an LIC or NEE city. Now, if you're studying Rio de Janeiro, that question basically means talk about the Favela Bairro project. So, Favela Bairro is a site and service scheme where the city's authorities provided land and services for residents to build homes and ultimately improve their quality of life. And one of the main areas in the Complexo do Alemo is a group of favelas in the North Zone where more than 60,000 people live. And you can see on here the sort of things they have done. Now, I'm going to advise you pause the video here, and you're going to want to learn at least 2 or 3 of these before the exam. They paved and formally named roads. They built new healthcare services. They improved access to waste removal services. The installation of the cable car systems across the entire favela. And you can see here what they did. So if we take them through, let's do the installation of cable car systems across the entire favela. Residents are given 1 free return ticket a day. This has reduced congestion and reduced air pollution, reducing health issues. But while it's expensive to maintain, it also offers additional opportunities for tourism, which could create a multiplier effect for the favela. Let's go with paved and formally named roads. Well, that can aid transport, which can in turn help business and trade, improve job opportunities, etc., etc. Now, the second part then are the urban issues in a HIC. Now, Liverpool is our case study, and it is located in northwest England and can be found on the banks of the River Mersey. On a national standpoint, Liverpool is one of the best shopping destinations. People come from all around to go shopping in Liverpool 1, and it also contains 5 of the top 10 museums in northern England as well. Huge swathe of museums that make it really nationally quite significant or quite important. On an international level, well, 38 million tourists from around the world visited 2018. You can add in Eurovision 2023 to that list now as well. We've got an international cruise terminal as well as an international airport. Liverpool Football Club are really famous in terms of sport, and we've also got the Beatles on there as well as a huge thing. Now, Liverpool's history is slightly strange because migration, in particular from Ireland during the Irish potato famine, had a profound impact on the city. How it had changed its cultural identity, well, the Irish migration led to the formation of the Scouse accent. Formerly, it was a typical Lancashire accent. Now it has the distinct Scouse link to it. The other main migration was from China, and Liverpool had UK's first Chinatown. Now, I would say here that this has really enriched the culture in the city, and I would also say as well that there's huge contribution to the economy, in particular with Irish and Chinese tourists nowadays as well. Most of the people nowadays that are migrating are either refugees from places like Syria or Afghanistan, and also from Eastern Europe and Poland as well. Now, on the flip side to that positive kind of trends of migration there, it can lead to pressure on housing, and it can lead to pressure on education as well. So there can be some downsides of migration in terms of Liverpool. But again, following the same theme as Rio then, we need to know about the challenges and the opportunities in Liverpool rather, and also some of the solutions in place. So, social then, let's look at education. Well, the exam results are significantly lower in Anfield, which is one area of Liverpool, than they are in Woolton, another area. There are huge amounts of unhealthy lifestyles. Life expectancy in Toxteth is the lowest in Merseyside, mainly due to drug abuse, alcoholism, crime and antisocial behaviour, and crime is starting to get worse as well in the area. But ultimately, and I have a little read through those and pause the video, ultimately, there are social challenges in any city. It's not just Liverpool. And it is very dependent on where you live. A resident in Anfield will be less healthy and less educated and less wealthy than one who lives in Woolton, and this impacts their quality of life in the long run. But unfortunately, these social impacts also have a knock-on effect because they can deter tourists from visiting, they can deter new businesses coming into the area as well. So they do need to be solved. On an economic standpoint, while Liverpool has had pretty good economic growth in recent years, unemployment in places like Anfield is still 9%, which is way higher than the UK average, can lead to negative poverty cycles, less tax gained, less investment, negative multiplier effects. We also have urban deprivation. The closure of the Docklands led to mass unemployment in Liverpool and becoming very, very deprived. And we also have housing inequality as well. Ultimately, Liverpool's entire story begins with the dock closures, leading to the issues from that as well. And once those dock closures were created, where kind of the dock workers were replaced with containerization, the invention of the shipping container, Liverpool went into a negative poverty cycle from that. And again, these key economic challenges persist and continue now. And then environmental, the main one is waste disposal. As population continues to grow, there's an increased pressure on waste disposal services. But the main three as well I talk about here are dereliction, greenfield sites, and commuter settlements. So the first one, dereliction, basically means inner city areas where buildings were left abandoned. I've put Anfield on the slide here, but also the Dockland areas as well. So where Everton are building their new stadium on Brownlee Moor Dock, there is huge dereliction around those areas. The buildings that are no longer used, they were horrific. They're now being regenerated for some extra gain. The pressure on greenfield sites, well, if you watch my other video, you'll see what a greenfield site is. But ultimately, because Liverpool is continuing to grow, they are having to build out into the rural urban fringe, and they are having to build into green sites, which are parks, fields, forests. So large residential areas have led to the loss of rural areas. We've also had places like the New Mersey Shopping Park, that's in Speke, leading to an increase in air and noise pollution due to traffic congestion. And finally, we've had the growth of something called a commuter settlement. Now, commuting just means travelling to work. So commuter settlement is a settlement where most people travel out of that area to go to work. So Alton in Ormskirk is where most people who live in that village will commute every day to Liverpool to go to work. Most people will leave Alton to go to Liverpool for work. Now, that's good in some ways because it can lead to kind of more business in the local area. The jobs tend to be higher paid in Liverpool. But ultimately, there's going to be more congestion and air pollution. The new housing could affect the character of the village. There's going to be house price increase, which is good for some, but not for all, etc. as well. So these are the environmental challenges. And as the city keeps growing, in theory, these will get worse as well. On to the opportunities, though, because there are several opportunities in Liverpool that are really, really important. Firstly, we've got recreation and cultural mixing. Well, Liverpool One is an amazing shopping centre, 29 million visitors in 2018, IMAX cinema, 170 shops. We can add in there the Albert Dock, everything as well. Cultural mixing, it was a European Capital of Culture 2008. It's got great food, festivals, and cultural experiences as well. And these are brilliant if you can afford it. So these kind of brilliant opportunities going to the IMAX cinema, going to Liverpool One, they're really, really great. But again, not everyone has the opportunity to make full use of these. On an economic standpoint, well, there's loads here. In 2018, 64 million tourists visited the city, providing 53,000 jobs for locals. I'd add in Eurovision on top of that, which will have a £126 million boost for the Liverpool economy as well. We've got the Baltic Triangle, which is an area of art, filmmaking, and digital design, providing employment opportunities in the tertiary and quaternary sectors. And we've got the Jaguar Land Rover plant in Halewood, providing 5,000 jobs. In addition to that as well, we've also got in Liverpool these integrated transport systems. The Mersey Travel Company operates city's buses, trains and ferries, and you can use prepaid cards to access most of the city. You can get, as an under 18, a day saver, which allows you to use the bus or train anywhere in Liverpool for under £3 a day. And that is also great for business because it enables commuters to get into the city for cheap, promoting more business to want to set up in the area. And finally, we do have some environmental opportunities. We've had a lot of urban greening. So Shavas Park in Liverpool 1 is made up of 5 acres of green space. Urban developers are looking to develop derelict wasteland into new housing projects. That's like Festival Gardens. And I'd add in the regeneration there of Everton's new stadium as well. The Bramley Moor dock was derelict. Dereliction is a huge environmental problem, but this regeneration is going to remove that dereliction and help out the area in the long term. But the main regeneration project we looked at was the Liverpool Albert Dock, or the Royal Albert Dock. Now, the picture in the top right-hand corner is what the docks used to look like. The water features don't exist. It's got a really poor kind of mud flat almost environment around it. And all these buildings here are derelict. The dock was no longer used after the closure of the docks. It was a derelict area and it was very, very unattractive. So what they wanted to do was to kind of improve the image of Liverpool and put it back on the map as an investment location. They spent a huge amount of money into the Albert Dock and surrounding areas. Okay, so they reclaimed the dock and upgraded it to include cafes, restaurants, and the Tate Art Gallery. They also developed Liverpool 1, which is obviously nearby, the Echo Arena, or as it's now called, the M&S Bank Arena, where Eurovision was held, attracted entertainment from around the world. And all of this created this huge positive multiplier effect, which had knock-on effects on people's health, their wealth, and their education. Additionally, as well, the Albert Dock itself attracts over 4 million visitors a year, and it has created a huge amount of cultural and economic success with that as well. I would argue that the Bramley Moor Dock development will have a similar impact. I mean, the last thing to look at in terms of Liverpool are just making sure we're clear on this integrated transport system. And for this one, it is transport for urban sustainability. Now, Liverpool has done quite a lot to improve its urban sustainability. And that basically means allowing the city to function today without damaging the environment and without damaging future generations to continue the same. So in Liverpool, they've come up with several different things. The first thing they came up with, and you can see the Metro Mayor there on the bus, is they now actually run hydrogen and electric powered buses. The first journey was actually from St Helens into Liverpool for Eurovision. So you might have a look out for these hydrogen-powered buses. They've also invested heavily in brand new trains for the Merseyrail system as well. Both those things are sustainable because they reduce the need for cars to reduce commuting and reduce air pollution, but they also promote business into the area as well. What they've also tried to start doing is they've tried to start building brand new cycle lanes into Liverpool. Now, these do not cut it. At the moment, I would still not say that Liverpool is a great bicycle city. However, you can see the Vauxhall Road, the Sefton Park Road, and the West Derby Road. They are trying to increase the amount of safe cycle lanes that are available for people within the city. Again, this is really, really important because a combination of all three would allow urban sustainability. But a small caveat, this came up as a 9-mark question. At the moment, the transport sustainability is good, but the network is not extensive enough. It is not as good as the London Underground is, which has more stops. The cycle lanes are great, but they're not everywhere in the city. So if you look at that map again, for some people in Liverpool, these are great, but not for everybody. And then the last thing to really look at here is something called sustainable urban living. Now, sustainable urban living refers to doing things in cities that, again, have a better impact on the environment, but also for people's social and economic well-being as well. And one of the best examples is actually in London, and it's a place called Bedzed. You can see here they've got living roofs on the top of the building, which improves the green space, it improves the air quality, improves people's mental health as well. They've got solar powers, to provide renewable energy. They have a car share scheme where people are then, saving money on commuting for work, etc. as well. They've got these huge heat trap systems that heat in winter and cool down in summer. And if you combine this with these plans here, you get a sustainable city. A sustainable city, in theory, is where everyone can afford to pay their rent, everybody has good health and education, and everyone has a strong living environment as well. Okay, now on to big case number 3. Now, moving on to section B, the changing economic world. Now, this section of the exam is looking at how development has changed over time. Now, development on a global scale basically means people's quality of life, their health, wealth, their education. Now, you guys need to know one major country to look at development, and our country we've chosen is Nigeria. So section B of the exam is now about countries, not cities, and this city is Nigeria. Now, you need to know, essentially, a little bit about Nigeria. So, it is a newly emerging economy. And if you read some of the facts on here, there are a number of different ethnic groups within Nigeria. It is in an equatorial region which borders 4 countries in the just about north of Africa. And Barack Obama stated that Nigeria is critical to the rest of the continent. It is Africa's most populous country, and it is one of the largest economies in Africa as well. Similar to Rio and Liverpool, we need to know about Nigeria's importance. Now, regionally, it is really, really important because it is the most populous African nation and one of the largest youth populations in the world. It also has the Nollywood film industry, which is the second most watched film industry after Hollywood. Now, in terms of that being a global or a regional, you can kind of put it in both, to be honest with you. One of the other reasons why Nigeria is globally important is because it is one of the world's biggest oil exporters, in particular looking at Shell, and its music and film industry is massive. It also exports other key goods like rubber, cocoa, and cotton. And Nigeria has undergone somewhat of a change. A former British colony, if we go back to 1975, the vast majority of Nigerians would work in the primary industry. Now, the primary industry would be things like agriculture, in particular subsistence agriculture, which is where the vast majority of Nigerians would have worked. Flash forward to 2014, and the amount of GDP generated in Nigeria is mainly from tertiary industries. Now, even though lots of people still work in the primary sector, tertiary and quaternary industries make more money for the government on average. The government of Nigeria want to encourage jobs in the secondary, tertiary, and now in the quaternary industry to improve their economic development. And what started to happen is the workforce now is becoming less primary and more secondary and tertiary. And Nigeria really, really, really wants to promote itself as a country and has many things that encourage it to develop. So firstly, most people in Nigeria actually speak very good English, and that encourages foreign investment, making it easier to operate business. They have overall a fairly stable government. We'll come on to that later, which encourages foreign investment. And they've had a huge growth in manufacturing, in particular in oil, which can lead to multiplier effects, and the increased use of telecommunications, which is beginning to drive the economy in addition to oil. A reminder that we should be pausing these videos to make some key notes. You don't need to know all four of those things, but it'd be worth having one or two in your back pocket to bring out when talking about Nigeria. Now, the main case study for Nigeria is looking at how manufacturing can stimulate an economy and improve quality of life. And the main manufacturing industry is Shell. Nigeria is a massively oil-rich country. And as a result of that, Shell have provided 65,000 people with direct employment. That direct employment can lead to local firms gaining more money. They spend more money in local businesses. Taxes to the government go up, and that money is then invested back into infrastructure to bring in more manufacturing industries, or it is also invested in infrastructure to improve healthcare and education. So again, it's about those positive multiplier effects. In addition to that, Shell have provided training for Nigeria's young people. They've set up education programs, and they've also paid 20 billion pounds in tax in 2013. So Shell are clearly having a major impact on the economy of Nigeria. However, we need to be clear here that despite all these benefits, Nigeria is still an NEE, and as we're going to come on to, a significant amount of the country does still live in poverty. So why may TNCs actually have disadvantages for what's called the host country? Now, Nigeria are the host country, and let's go through some of the ideas here. Shell have spilt 9 million oil barrels in the last 50 years. The frequent oil flares send toxic fumes into the air, and poverty can increase due to that pollution. There's rumours that Shell are funding militant groups, and in addition to that as well, there are many kind of human rights concerns with Shell and what they do for the local people. Now, this could quite easily become a large mark question, so I'll leave you to read this yourself. I'm not going to read through it. To what extent do the advantages of TNCs outweigh the disadvantages in promoting economic development? Well, you can read here the different parts of this question. And it's really, really important that with a to what extent question, there always has to be a counter argument. So, for example, in paper 1, it was asking about to what extent does prediction alter the effects of tropical storms? In this case here, you need to say to what extent do they actually help? So you need to do both sides of an argument why they do help, but also why they don't always help as well, and then come to a conclusion. So I'll let you pause the video to have a read through this answer now. Okay. And the final little part, really, looking at Nigeria, are its political, social, cultural, and environmental background. Now, I strongly recommend that you learn one of each of these things because I think this will be on the exam this year. So, politically, its background is that Nigeria was part of the British Empire, it had several civil wars, and now it is starting to lean to links with China. So, in the past, Nigeria's political leanings were all to do with the UK and part of the British Empire. In the future, they are starting to lean towards China. On a social level, there is a huge, huge, huge difficulty, in particular with the divides in wealth. So, not only is it a north south divide like there is in the UK, 60% of children in urban areas attend school, but only 36% in rural areas. So if you are in a rural area, you are not going to be attending school anywhere near as much. We've also got the Islamic fundamentalist group Boko Haram as well, and you might have seen on the news they were responsible for kidnapping groups of schoolgirls predominantly. Boko Haram basically means against Western education, and they don't believe in school children, particularly women, having the education they have. So that's their social and political background. On a cultural level, The Super Eagles, a Nigerian football team, has won the African Cup of Nations on 3 occasions. Loads of Premier League players involved there. And Nollywood is the second largest film industry in the world. And the environmental stuff, well, we know that about the idea of the oil reserves as well, and much of the problems that are associated with that. Nigeria does receive a huge amount of aid, in particular from the UK government. It has voluntary aid from non-governmental organisations such as Oxfam and WaterAid, but also international aid from other countries as well. The UK provides mosquito nets, money for education, money for road and transport infrastructure improvement in Nigeria, all in the hope of improving Nigeria's outlook. But this leads us to the biggest question, I think, perhaps on this topic, and that's whether all of these different things, the aid, the manufacturing, has had an impact on the quality of life in Nigeria. And you'd have to say overall, yes, it has. Life expectancy has increased from 41 years to 52.5 years. Infant mortality has reduced from 211 to 108. The adult literacy rate has increased by 4%. We've had more rights for women. The women who believe that the husband is justified in beating his wife when she argues with him has gone down from 43% to 21%. So overall, it is very clear that there has been a significant improvement in the health, wealth, education, the development of Nigeria. However, they are still significantly lower than HICs, and there are still quite a high number of people living below the poverty line. So in Nigeria today, there are still 60 million people, that's nearly the population of the UK, living below the poverty line. And that means living without basic access to sanitation, to healthcare, to education. Another 60 million people are living just above it. And it's only really the top 20-30% of Nigerians that are living comfortably. So if you were talking about whether it had improved the quality of life for Nigeria, I would say that overall it has improved for some people, it has improved, but realistically, for the vast majority, or for 60 million people, it hasn't improved enough. They're still below the poverty line. There's quite a long way to go there. Other main issues in Nigeria, well, 15% of the world's children are still out of school. Many girls and women, in particular in northern Nigeria, exclude women and girls from education. Only 1 in 4 girls move on to secondary school in northern Nigeria, which is quite a harsh fact, really. Businesses still lack access to regular electricity supply. Terrorism occurs in the north, with Boko Haram making repeated attacks. And there are outbreaks of violence as well in the Niger Delta from that. So if we're looking overall at this picture of Nigeria, I think it's quite clear to say, from the one hand, the manufacturing stimulation from Shell, the changing industrial structure, the fact that Nigeria is setting itself up for development mean that for some people, quality of life has improved quite dramatically, but not all, because there is still this huge wealth inequality in Nigeria, and there are still significant issues, in particular in the north of the country, that are really, really problematic for the area. And then lastly, is how tourism can help development. Now, given the pre-release on the Cayman Islands, I'm not going to dwell on this one too much, but Kenya is also an African country. It is just above LIC status, and tourists would visit for the Masai Mara tribe and for the safari. On an economic standpoint, tourism is massive for Kenya. It generates 226,000 jobs, and we compare that to like Liverpool as a city. A huge amount of jobs for Kenya, really. 5.3 billion to their economy. We know about positive multiplier effects from that. However, the profits often go to foreign companies rather than the local community. There have been improvements in quality of life. Local infrastructure is improved, and the locals can sometimes use the new tourist facilities, but a lot of the projects for local communities are sidelined for tourism. That's the kind of downside of tourism, is that a lot of the money is being spent on improving new hotels or new roads for an airport rather than maybe community projects for achieving safe water, etc., for people as well. And finally, for the environment, well, on the one hand, it's always great that tourists can be educated about the local environment, but there's huge damage to the coral reefs in the areas. There's other issues like disruption to wildlife habitat that have got to be attributed in some way to tourism. Now, the final case study for the economic world is looking at the United Kingdom. Now, this isn't as such a case study, but I'm going to give you a few little snippets of extra information to put into the exam. Now, the first one is something called a sustainable industrial development. Now, all this means is an industrial development in the UK, we're going to take the Tor Quarry in Somerset. We've looked at Somerset already. We know where it is in the south of England. And a sustainable industrial development basically means development that can continue making money and improving the economy, but limiting its impact on the environment. So what are they trying to do in the Tor Quarry? Well, they're being used to restore wildlife lakes. They're monitoring the amount of dust and they're monitoring the water quality to make sure that they don't harm it. And they are using rail transport to transport the rocks rather than importing hundreds or thousands of lorries every year, therefore minimizing the air pollution risks as well. Have a little read through that impact on there. But this quarry is really, really important. A quarry makes rocks. £15 million towards the local economy. We can't get rid of this quarry. And traditionally, quarries would have been really bad for the environment. They leave open landscape scarring. You move all the rocks away, and it's not ideal. But by improving the rail transport, removing all the need for lorries, that reduces air and noise pollution. They are restoring wildlife lakes, parts of the quarry. So if you have a look at one on Google, they're basically left as like these big open rock, like kind of scars in the earth. Once they're done with them in the Tor Quarry, they're also landscaping them as well. So they're planting new animals, new species of plants and animals, and encouraging wildlife to take over again a little bit, really. So it is more sustainable. And then secondly, is looking at rural decline. Now, a cycle of rural decline is very similar to a cycle of poverty. And the idea is in some parts of the world, some parts of the UK rather, people are leaving for more opportunities in rural or in urban areas. If we're in a rural area, employers might find it difficult to recruit labour. Less investment happens in the area and businesses shut. There's less money, less employment, and fewer shops. People notice the decline and the lower quality of life, and so they leave for urban areas. And this cycle continues and continues and continues. Now, in some parts of the world, like in South Cambridgeshire, this has actually not happened. In Cambridge, the city, we have had the building of science parks, and therefore we have had actually lots and lots of people trying to live in these rural areas, and the opposite is happening. Whilst we are having more commuters, it links back to those commuter settlements, whilst we are having more commuters, which does impact on air pollution and the building of greenfield sites, to link that back as well. On the other hand, we can also have positive multiplier effects in the area, more houses being built, etc. It's positive and negative. I'd say it's positive economically, but negative environmentally for that. We can also have the opposite. So an area of decline is the Outer Hebrides, and the Outer Hebrides, this is now happening. They are having to close the schools, not enough children to go to the schools. And because families can't send their kids to school, they are starting to leave as well. And if this cycle continues, these areas will become poorer and poorer and poorer and have more and more issues. In South Cambridgeshire, whilst a lot of the environmental problems are clear, the fact that these science parks are being built, they're attracting all these wealthy, highly educated young people. They want to find a house. They can't find one inside the urban area, so they look for one in the rural urban fringe, like in this example here. Yes, it builds on greenfield sites. Yes, it increases air pollution, but Look at the services there. Loads of people to invest in healthcare and schools stay open. Um, yes, okay, locals might not be able to afford the houses anymore, but people's values go up. And also, I think of the positive multiplier effect again for local businesses in these areas moving forward. And then the last two major case studies are on section C, and you guys in my group will be answering about water. Now, the first big case study, and this one hasn't come up for a while, is looking at large-scale water transfer projects. In particular, we are looking at the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. The idea of this project is they are trying to transfer water from highland Lesotho, which is in water surplus, to an area of South Africa, which is in water deficit. Now, if you look at the information on the left-hand side of the video here, you can see that South Africa has a really large population and really low water. It has frequent droughts. It is in water deficit. And Lesotho has quite a lot. So what they did was they built a load of dams, and they then transferred that water from the area of surplus in Lesotho to the area of deficit in South Africa, from the Sengu River in Lesotho to the Vaal River in South Africa. Now, this has clear economic benefits. Lesotho receives $1.5 million a month for the water. It's created thousands of jobs, and it's also meant that because they've built dams, they've now got hydroelectric power in Lesotho. However, on the flip side to this, the building of dams displaces thousands of people. When you build dams, you have to flood the area behind the dam to create a reservoir. Peoples were forced to leave. They lost their homes, they lost their farmland, clear social issues there. And also, as well, Lesotho itself hasn't necessarily solved this problem. There could still be cracks in the pipes and pollution potentially long term as well. Now, obviously, there are other strategies like desalination for improving water insecurity, but you definitely want to know this case study, the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. It has got a very strong chance of coming up. The final case study then is the Wakel River Basin. Now, the Wakel River Basin is an area in northern India, and it is one of the driest regions in India. Less than 250 millimeters of rainfall, 53 degrees temperature with high evaporation rates. Now, in the Wakel River Basin, unfortunately, water extraction isn't regulated. So we get to over-abstraction. And because of the climate itself as well, they find it very difficult to store water. So what have they done in the Wakel River Basin? Well, first things first, they've built something called a tankus. Now, a tankus is basically a concrete container that stores water underground, and you can see the people there. They're going to collect the water from the roofs of these concrete domes. What this means is they actually create a cool storage area so water isn't lost through evaporation. It's basically to cool the water down and store water they do have. However, concrete is not particularly good for the environment. They also create pats, which are small dams that divert water from streams into farmlands. And this is really, really good because what these allow is it's called appropriate technology or low technology. And it basically means that farmers can receive a constant supply of water, reducing the risk of crop failures. And then the last thing they can do, and this is a really, really important one, is education. What they did was they created awareness of protecting clean water supplies and not extracting too much water. What did this do? Well, it taught the local population that actually, if they want to coexist together, they need to improve what they are doing now. However, education is brilliant, but it takes a long time to change people's habits. It has taken a generation in the UK to tell people to turn their lights off when they leave the room and to take shorter showers. It's one thing giving the education, it's another thing actually doing it. Okay, so that's it in today's video. At the behest of my year 11s, there is an outro video coming up. I think it is a solid 7 or 8 out of 10 this time. I'm quite proud of it. and I will be taking requests for paper 3 intros and outros as well. As always, make sure if you've kind of watched this video, I would recommend going back through it and making some key flashcards or notes on the key bits of information. Definitely watch it more than once. These case studies will form the bulk of the 6 and 9 markers in this exam. They will form the bulk of it, and that is a huge amount of marks you can gain from using them. Thank you for watching, and please check out my Paper 2 Tricky Topics video and any other videos that come up on the thing as well.